In this video, we're going to take a look at Intigriti's August challenge, which was created by me, CryptoCat. I never made a monthly challenge for Intigriti before, so with Defcon coming up, I thought this would be a good opportunity. And I'm recording it about 10 days before the conference, so some of the details may change, maybe the dates and the prizes, but the solution should remain the same. Most of my inspiration for this challenge came from watching the Critical Thinking Bug Bounty podcast, so if you didn't solve this challenge and you watched the podcast or listen to the podcast, then maybe you've got some ideas what vulnerabilities could be included, and hopefully it'll inspire you to check it out, or at least finish watching this video. I did my best to make sure there were no unintended solutions, but if there were any cool ones, I'll list them on our Gitbook, along with all of the community write-ups that are submitted to us. And that's about it. I'll just mention as well, we made the source code available for this challenge. I wanted it to be a white box challenge. I know people prefer it, but it also means that there's less risk of things going wrong with our infrastructure. Not only does it reduce the pressure on it, but also it means if the server goes down, people can still solve the challenge locally. It doesn't kind of ruin it for everybody. Hopefully that went down well. I know people like to review the source code, and it also means people can just have a look at the source and see, okay, there's no sense in us brute forcing login credentials or fuzzing files, directories, things like that. Anyway, before we have a look at the source code, let's go and take a look at the challenge server. I like to just go and have a look at the site functionality first of all. So we don't have many options at the moment. Let us go to log in, and we might as well try and register a new account. So I'm just going to create one with a username cat and a password cat. Register, it automatically logs us in. We just got a homepage here with some descriptions of what the site does. So let's check out each one of the features. The first one is create a note. I'm just going to put in here, hi, create, and it gives us a note ID, and we can copy the note ID. We can view the note, which takes us through to this view page. So yeah, we could just take a copy of that. We could also go here, view note, paste that in, and then view it. Cool, let's go to the reports. It asks for a note URL. Okay, let me go back. So we'll get the note, we'll take a copy of the URL, we'll go to report it, and it just comes back and says it was reported successfully. What if we try something else in here, like Google? Okay, so it has to be a valid URL. We'll have a look at some of the validation later. And finally, we've got the contact us form then. So yeah, all right, let's put some stuff in. Let's just do crypto@cat. I can't remember if there's any validation there to make sure it's valid, but there we go. We click send, and that's it. It redirects us back to the home page. And then finally, we've got an option to log out. Let's just test it for the sake of it. But yeah, it does what we would expect it to do. All right, so you could just go and start open up the console, and we could maybe see what requests are going backwards and forwards as we're checking out these different endpoints. We could go and have a look. Why is that so small? No, not that. Why is this so small? Yeah, we could go and have a look through the JavaScript and stuff in here, try and work out what's going on. You can see here it's actually importing DOM Purify. But what's the point in us doing it here when we could just go and have a look at the source code, and we can even go and run things locally, maybe throw in a lot of debugging statements around the place to see how things are looking. There's a lot of benefits to running the local Docker instance yourself. Okay, I moved over to VS Code. I've got the project open. We have got Docker Compose here. So you can run this locally just by running the start sh script. But we've got 3 containers. We've got this web container, which is our website that's running the notes. And we've got a database, Postgres, and then we've got a bot as well, which you can see has a flag set up, which is trying to encourage us to solve this locally rather than crashing the server. And yeah, that's it. Let's go straight over to the bot. I mean, you could have a look around in general to see where the flag is going to be. In this case, we can see it's going straight to the bot as an environment variable. So we're going to jump in there. If you're a regular CTF player, you probably had an idea that we needed to check the bot anyway, because this is quite a standard kind of a challenge. And what's happening, right? So there's a visit endpoint. It takes a URL as the request body. It makes sure that the URL starts with the base URL. In this case, it's localhost, but if we're doing it against a remote server, that's going to be the challenge URL. So there's some validation there to make sure we can't put in some attacker controlled URL. And it's going to create a new page. It's going to set a flag for the base URL. So it's going to set a cookie, and the cookie is going to contain the flag. And then it's going to go to the URL we provide. It's going to sleep for a little while, and then it's going to close. So that's it. We need to steal this flag from the admin bot. So you see this in XSS challenges a lot. So that's probably what you're thinking of at the moment. I mentioned there was some validation here to make sure this starts with the base URL. I added a lot of validation in around the place, and we'll have a look at some of that now. Let's go over to the web container, and let's go and see the report functionality. Yeah, so down here, whenever you actually report the URL, it's going to parse it. It's going to make sure that the scheme starts with HTTP or HTTPS. And that's to make sure people can't put in like file or JavaScript as a protocol or something weird that I don't know about. And then it's also going to check some other parts of the URL. So it's parsing the URL. It's going to make sure the net locator matches the base as well. They'll be provided as an environment variable. And that's basically going to be the challenge domain. So in this case, it would just be this bit. And then it's also going to make sure that the path equals /view, which let's go back to view a note. Oh, okay. With view a note, okay, so here's the path, so it has to match this. And then finally, it's also going to make sure that after the question mark, so after the query, it has note equals. One more check then after that is to make sure that the final 36 characters of the URL are a valid UID. So it'll make sure that this matches the regex of a UUID. Providing that it does, that's it. It's going to go and visit the URL. So yeah, I added a lot of validation in here. Hopefully this adds a bit of complexity just to make it a little bit hard to debug, but also I know there's a lot that can go wrong with URL parsing and things. So I just wanted to make sure there was little chance of any unintended solutions. I mean, I do want this to be vulnerable, but I want it to be vulnerable in the very specific place that I intend. Okay, so let's put that together as well. Let's just try and visualize how this might look. Maybe you want to do this with some debugging statements or something, but let me just put this here for now, then we'll undo it. All right, so we know it's got to begin with HTTPS or HTTP. We know that the net locator has to match here. We know that it has to have the path set to /view, so we can't change any of this. This is how it has to be. After that, we know that the query has to contain this. So it doesn't actually say the query must equal note equals. It says it has to contain it, which means we could just do like A equals B and C equals D and E equals F or whatever. So we can keep putting in different query parameters there as long as it has a note query somewhere in it. And then we also need to make sure it ends with this as well. So that's also fine. We can have it end like that. We could potentially do some other tricks to make it end with this. Like, for example, at the moment we have that set to the note is equal to this, but why don't we set the note is equal to something malicious? And then we've just got another random parameter at the end which meets that criteria. However, if we take this now and go to the browser, see what happens if we enter it here. Notice that we get an error here, so it doesn't actually accept that. And why might that be? Let's go back to views. Let me undo all this. And let's go and see what happens when we view the note. Okay, so we've got view. Okay, let's go to view.html. And yes, there's actually a check here as well. So is valid UUID. And you can see that it's actually checking the note ID from the get parameter. See here, it gets the parameter and it checks to make sure it's valid. So it isn't enough just to have any random parameter at the end, which meets this. It needs to be the note parameter. Now, there's another little trick here, but I'll not go into it yet. Let's just keep having a look through the code. So if you weren't already thinking about it, hopefully you have started to think about cross-site scripting. And I just want to highlight a couple of things. The first is that if we go to create.html, where our note is created, you'll notice it actually takes the note value and then it's going to sanitize it with the latest DOM purify before it sends it off to be stored. So that's not looking too good for us. And if you go to views.py, let's see what happens when that store is actually called. All right, so it takes the content parameter from us and then it's going to pass it through Bleach as well, also the latest version, to strip out any potential XSS payloads. So there we go. We've got 2 layers of sanitization happening on our input. And if you go to have a look at the view.html again, you'll unfortunately also see that our note content is loaded here with DOM purify. But there is another parameter here. It reads a data.debug, and if this exists, it's going to set this to outer HTML, but it's not using DOM purify. The problem is, if we go back to the create page, it only takes the content from us. Look, it's got this key content and then it's the sanitized content. So there is no debug. Now, you might just think, okay, well, why don't we just forge a request to this endpoint? However, if we go back again, back to views.py, remember it only reads in the content parameter whenever it goes to store it. So even if we forward a request to this endpoint that sends a debug parameter, it's not going to store it anywhere. And then whenever it goes to view it, obviously it's just going to, when we go view.html, yeah, it's not going to find the debug, so it's never going to end up in this outer HTML. There is some interesting code at the beginning of this function though. Notice where it takes the note ID, it first makes sure that it doesn't include ... which is interesting. Let's go back to the view note page, and what happens if we just replace this with ... We'll see that we get an error because it's not a valid note. So we only need the last 36 characters to be a valid UUID. It doesn't say anything about what's before it. So let's do view note, and now we get input is not allowed. But let's go back to the code and see what's actually happening. It's checking if the ... is in the note ID, and then if it's not, it's going to decode URI component. So if you go and have a look at this function, you'll find that it's basically going to decode the URL. So why don't we just go in URL encode? We could use Burp Suite decoder, or we could go to CyberChef. All right, and if we go in here, we do a ... and then we can do URL. Okay, it's not even there. Where is it? URL encode, and encode all special characters. We'll take a copy of it. We'll go back here and let's put this in, and we'll see that it's not allowed. All right, let's try that here. And what do we get? Okay, so we don't get the error here. Basically, modern browsers will decode what's in here. So if we put this in, it is going to decode it. Let me open up F12 as well. Let's go to our network tab. All right, so let's do enter here. And notice then we don't have any call to the API. It didn't make that fetch request. What if we go back though and double URL encode? So take a copy of this. In fact, don't need to take a copy of that. We can just add another URL encode here. And then we'll just take a copy of this one. We'll paste this in here and hit enter. And notice that this time we've got a 404. We've got a 404 because instead of going to, where is it? API notes/fetch. This time it only went to API/notes. That's because it went back a directory. Let's try this again. And I'm going to go back 1, 2, 3. All right, I'm going to take a copy of the URL. Notice now it went straight to the root directory. So it's tried to request this file, which obviously doesn't exist. So what we have there is the client-side path traversal. And yeah, I mentioned this was kind of my inspiration for making this video. This is talked about a lot on the Critical Thinking Bug Bounty podcast. And I found a lot of cool write-ups from bug bounty reports to blog posts to research papers, which I'll link in the Git book. I highly recommend you read through. There's some really cool attacks in there. But just to summarize from Doyensek's blog post, every security researcher should know what a path traversal is. This vulnerability gives an attacker the ability to use a payload like ... to read data outside the intended directory. Unlike server-side path traversal attacks, which read files from a server, client-side path traversal attacks focus on exploiting this weakness in order to make requests to unintended API endpoints. And that sounds like exactly what we want to do, right? We've got an API endpoint here, we can fetch notes, we can store notes, and we've got a path traversal on the client side which can allow us to manipulate this path. And that is occurring because the user input, i.e. the note ID, is being passed into this API call. Notice that CSRF protection is enabled, and this is the interesting part about the client-side path traversal attacks, is if we can trick another user, like the admin or the bot that we have in this case, to access some API endpoint, the CSRF token will be included because they're accessing it on the client side, and that token is going to be sent along with it as per this code. So before we look for some interesting endpoints to traverse to, we first need to deal with the issue that we have where the note ID is appended to the end of whatever endpoint we go to. So just to demonstrate this, let me change this. Let's add the home directory in here. So we're going back 3 directories to home. But of course, whenever we load this, the same thing is going to happen. Notice if we go down here, we've got a 404 because it's accessing home / and then this path that doesn't exist. But we need the valid UUID at the end. We need that to be part of the note parameter. But there's nothing to stop us from changing this up a little bit. Why don't we go ahead and put in a question mark here? So this might be another query, and then say like lol equals, and let's try that. Reload. Let's see, we've got a 200 OK. And look at that, it's the path is just file now, and then you've got this lol parameter. So that was valid. Let me have a look at the response. Here you see that we have the homepage, but we don't have the homepage here. And let's just do this again. I'll just copy and paste that. Did it come up with an error? I didn't actually come up with anything. Let me paste that in again. Oh, I'm waiting for the error in the browser. I should be looking in the console. Here we go. So yeah, it's received the data, but it's looking for JSON. Remember, if we go back to view, it is, response.json, and then it's going to get the content key from the JSON object, and then it's going to load the value after non-purifying it. So there's nothing we can do here, right? Because we need to find an endpoint on the website which is going to deliver a JSON object, which I don't think there are any. So, and even if there were, it's not likely to deliver any malicious JSON, is it? We'll worry about that shortly. Let's first of all just see what happens whenever we test the different endpoints. All right, so we've already looked at home. I can't think of any possible reason that we would want to redirect them to that endpoint. So let's paste this in again. What other endpoints did we have? We have got create. So we could send them to create. Let's have a look at the network tab. There we go. All right, so yeah, it made a request and it got the response. There we go, create note. But again, doesn't really seem to be useful. What are we going to do with that? It's just a 200 OK. All right, what else can we do? We could do the API notes store. Remember, this is calling API/notes/fetch. So why don't we just go back one directory? I'll take some of this out. Let's go back to here. And then we'll change that to store. So now, instead of calling the fetch endpoint, we're calling the store endpoint. We do that, and we get a 405 because we're not allowed to do that. We can only send a post request. And this is one of the things about client-side path traversal is you don't have any control over the type of request that's sent, the parameters that are sent with it, the headers and things like that. So sometimes you just have to make do with what you have. And what else do we have? We have got the report option. All right, I can't think what use that would be unless we want to end up in some like permanent reporting loop. But yeah, we can make a GET request. Again, it's just got the report here, but I can't think of a use for it. Maybe somebody will find some weird unintended that is not coming into my mind. But let's see, what else we have? The last one is, well, we've got contact, but again, we need to send a post request to that. We have log out, so we could log out the user. And I'm not going to do that because I just can't bother logging out and logging back in. But yeah, that does work. We could just send this to the user, change this to log out, and send that to the bot, and it'll log the bot out. But again, there's no use. So I've been through all the endpoints and we didn't find anything useful. Or did we? Let's go back to the contact form. So I intentionally skipped over this earlier, but if we send the contact form, let's do it again. Cat. We'll go and click send. It took us back to the home page. Now, if we go over to Burp Suite and look what actually happened, we sent her a post request and it's returned us to /home. We've got a 302 redirect and we've been redirected to home. So we can redirect the user to an endpoint of our choosing. Again, what's the use? We can already do that. We can already redirect them to any one of these endpoints. So let's go take a look at the code. Let's see what we have here in the contact form. Where is it? All right. Yeah, it's pretty simple. It takes the return. So basically, you're supposed to find the return parameter in this post request. Let me send this to the repeater. You find that this has a post request. We don't have a post to contact. We've only got a get. But what happens if you just go ahead and change the request method and click on send? Found. There we go. It redirected to home. Okay, what if we do the same thing again and we could do it to another one? Let's do report, send, and this time it will redirect us to report. We can follow that redirect, and there we go. We have been redirected. Again, not much use, but what is happening here with the isSafe URL? And we're going to check this function. It's very basic. All it does is make sure that the protocol is HTTP or HTTPS. Again, I mentioned earlier, I was just a bit concerned that people might use like JavaScript or file or some protocol that can just get them an XSS very quickly or read some files from somewhere or something. Let's go ahead and try that. Let's go back here. Let's go back and change this to HTTPS google.com. We click send. We follow the redirection. And there we go. We've got to follow another redirection apparently. And there we go. We've now loaded Google. So we can redirect the victim to an external domain of our choosing. So we want to test this with our attacker domain, but I just want to mention as well some interesting URL encoding stuff. So what if we were to change this a little bit? You notice that we have our query. So it's note is equal to, and then we've got our traversal. And then we've got the lol parameter, which we need to be a valid UUID. What would happen if I change this to an ampersand? Let's do that and then hit enter. Notice we get it's not a valid note ID now because it's checking this note parameter for that. It's not checking the lol one. However, we could URL encode it. So I could do %26, which is an ampersand. And then if we do it again, this time it will work. And the reason being, it would have seen that all as one parameter. Let me actually go to the code so it makes a bit more sense. So let's go to view. So it's checking the note ID down here. It would have seen that all as one parameter because it didn't see an ampersand. It saw a %26. But by the time it gets to the API call, it's going to be decoded. So it will be a valid ampersand. All right, so we can do that. But what if we go back now? Let's change this to the contact. So I'm going to do here contact. And then we also want to set the return URL. So if I do question mark equals return, and then we'll say, sorry, no, I'll do question mark return equals, and then we'll say https google.com, and then we've got the URL encoded and at the end. Let's try that. Let me open up F12 as well so we can see what's going on. We send it, okay, and then we get the request to Google, so that's awesome. Now, let me do that again, and this time let us change that to an ampersand. We know that's not going to work because the UUID is no longer at the end of the notes ID. So I'm going to do a %26, and then we'll hit enter. And this time we don't get the request to Google. The reason for that is quite simple. If you have a look at the URL, we've got the HTTPS, the challenge URL, and then /contact and return. So there's no question mark to denote the start of the query. So it's fine to use these ampersands for each of the keys, but the first key must be preceded by the question mark to indicate that it's a query. There's probably a few different techniques that you could use to do this as well. You could also potentially just access a URL and say like another question mark equals at the end here. We didn't really need that extra parameter. And then it would call Google and then this query. Probably the easiest way to do it is just to use just question marks all the way through it. So if we do here question mark and then a question mark here as well, hit enter, and there we go. That's a full chain. And we now have the request to Google. It did use that query, but again, it's fine. If we have a look at the response, oh, it was blocked by privacy something or other. That's fine. Well, we don't need to worry about it. Let's just go and try this with our attacker server. So you can use a lot of different tools for this, maybe ngrok or request bin or webhook or something like that. I'm just going to open up Sublime and I'm going to paste in the URL we've been using, and then I'm going to go and set up a local web server. So let me show you this alias I have set up for a Python server. So I'm just going to run webup, and that's the command that it's running. It's now serving all of the files that are in this directory on the local host, port 80, and I want to expose that to the internet. So I'm going to do ngrok http 80, and it's going to do exactly that. It's going to expose whatever's on port 80 locally to this address on the internet. So if we go and visit that in the browser, it'll show everything that's in that directory. And I'm going to go paste this in here. I'm going to take a copy of it. I'm going to go back to the browser, paste it in. And this time you'll see that we get the request, but we've got this options request and it says cause missing allow origin. Let us have a look at our HTTP server logs, and let me minimize some of this stuff so we can see it a little bit better. Yeah, so unsupported method options, and here we have options, so 501 unsupported. I basically just threw this into ChatGPT, and apparently the error message is because the server doesn't support the options method. And we can just create a application which will use cause. You can use like a Flask application. And I did exactly that. So let me just take a copy. Oh, why was that, by the way? So apparently, according to ChatGPT, the reasons why this options method is required is for the cause pre-flight requests, which are automatically sent when certain conditions are met, such as using other methods than get, head, or post, which we're not. We're using get and post requests. The second is using custom headers, so it looks like that's probably why this has happened. And the third is sending any data in the request body other than simple text, which I don't believe we're doing either. So yeah, it looks like that's the reason. Let us go ahead and create a new application. I'm going to do code, and then I'll do app.py. I'm just going to paste this in here. So yeah, a cause app. We're going to accept get and post requests, and we're going to send an index.json file off. So I'm going to create that in a second. let's do code index.json. And we already know that it's taken a content parameter, right? So let's do content is equal. Why is that looking weird? Doesn't like the syntax. So all right, let's try it. Let's do, I just injected this. All right, it wanted double quotes, I guess, for some reason. There's also a status that it takes. You don't really need to add this, I don't think, but I'll just make it a bit more like what it's expecting. But there we go, that's that setup. Now I need to put the ngrok on the port that this is going to run on as well. I think it's port 5000. Yeah, so let's do ngrok http 5000. All right, copy this again. I'm going to take it to Sublime. I'm going to paste it in here. Take a copy again, back to the browser, paste it in. And this time we don't have that error. We've got a 200 OK on options. And then we've got a 200 OK on the GET request. And if we have a look here, we have injected this note content into the page. So we got around the error. Remember, it was looking for JSON content and we were getting an error in here to say it was invalid. Well, because we're able to send content from our attacker server, because the fetch request is followed automatically, we can send content in whatever format we want, and we're going to send it in JSON format, which is what the server is expecting. All right, so we have changed the client-side path traversal with the open redirect in order to inject content into this page, but we need a cross-site scripted now. So let me go back to the index.json. I'm going to paste this in. That's way too big. All right, we'll paste this in, and I was meant to just paste it into the content bit. Let's do that. Okay, and then we want the attacker server, so I will take a copy of that here. This is just a very simple XSS payload, which is going to try and load this image. It's an invalid source. That's not a valid source, obviously. So it's going to trigger an on error, and that is going to make this fetch request, which we want to put in a valid address there. So there we go. And it should include the document.cookie with it as well. Let's set a document.cookie, actually. Let's go here and say document.cookie is equal to CryptoCat is the best. All right, and then we can save this. I believe I need to reboot the server. Let me do that. And that's it. We don't need to change this or anything. So let's go here. Let's open up our dev tools, just see what happens. We hit enter. Do we get any errors in the console? We do, yeah, because it's an invalid source, right? The X, so it tried to request that image, but we didn't get, let's have a look. Yeah, we didn't get anything in the console log, and we've got the broken image here. Why is that? Let's have a look. We'll inspect it. We'll see, our on error was stripped out of the image. Why? Well, we have only bypassed 2 of 3 sanitizations. So remember, whenever we go to store a note, the input is being passed through DOM Purify. We've bypassed that stage now because we're delivering the content from our server instead. Whenever you store a note, it also passes the input through Bleach on the server side. Again, we're bypassing the storage completely, but there is, of course, the view.html, which before it loads the content from our server is going to sanitize it with DOM Purify. However, we had this data.debug option. Remember I was saying there was no way that we could possibly pass a debug option. We can't forge the request to that API, and there was no way for us to inject this. But now there is a way for us to do that. We can just go back here, and where is index.json? All right, go back. Let's just change this to debug. Save it. Let's restart the server. Let's take a copy of that URL, and let's paste it in here. All right, it's going to load. We could have a look at the console, the network if we want. Yeah, it went through, and look at the request that it's made. CryptoCat is the best. Let's have a look at our server logs. And yeah, there we go. We've got our cookie in the server log. So we have confirmed that our attack works. All we need to do now is repeat this against the admin. I'm going to go and send them this URL. Click submit. The note was reported successfully. Go back to the server, and we got the cookie. There we go. Flag, Intigriti, to do. I haven't actually created a flag yet, so I'll do that before Defcon in about 10 days. But yeah, that's how we can solve the challenge. All right, the video has gone on long enough, so I'll try to wrap it up here. I did make a detailed write-up, which will be on the Intigriti Git book, so I encourage you to check it out. There is a summary at the end, which just has some bullet points of how I expected players to interact with the challenge, what the barriers for them to overcome would be. So if you just want to go and have a look at a quick TLDR, that's there. An even quicker TLDR is we basically had a client-side path traversal chained with an open redirect, which led to an XSS with some interesting validation and filters and stuff in place. And yeah, if anybody finds any cool unintended solutions, they'll also be at the end of the Git book. And so will all of the awesome community write-ups, so check those out as well. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this challenge. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed Defcon if you made it. If not, hope to see you there next year. And come back next month for the September challenge. Yeah, hope you've enjoyed this video. Any questions, comments, leave them down below. Thanks.